Apologies. While we get this going, I just thought I'll take a minute to thank all of you for coming across this afternoon for what promises to be a really exciting and very, very important presentation. The issue of Aadhaar has been front and center in most public policy debates for the last few months. And as Aadhaar becomes more and more a part of our lives, I've just had to organize my tax returns, so I've really had to use my Aadhaar number seriously for the first time. Many questions are being asked about Aadhaar, and we have the privilege of, for the first time, having a fairly comprehensive evidence base to understand what the real state of Aadhaar is today, thanks to the hard work of ID Insight and their recently released State of Aadhaar report. So I think this is the first objective, empirical base of understanding what's actually happening on the ground with Aadhaar. Like most public policy debates in India, very often the big picture ideological questions that these public policy debates ask tend to take forefront, and the evidence often takes a back seat. And this particular piece of work, I think, is the first effort at really building an evidence base so we understand what is happening, and that this evidence base can act as a frame of reference for the deeper ideological conversations that we are having about what Aadhaar implies for citizen-state relations going forward. So we are privileged to have Ron Abraham from ID Insight and the ID Insight team, along with some colleagues from the Omidyar network who've been funded this work here with us this afternoon. Ron will walk us through some of the highlights of the report, and then we'll open it up for discussion and conversation. Just one small technical issue. There seems to be some problem with our mics. There's a humming sound, so we've switched it off. So when we do get into the Q&A, unfortunately, I'm going to ask you guys to exercise your vocal cords. We'll have to speak a little loudly to get heard. But that's not a sign of the debate. We hope that this is a sober, evidence-based debate and not one where the loudest will win. Over to you, Ron.
Thanks a lot, Yamini. So first of all, thank you so much to, actually, ho gaya. Thank you. Thanks a lot for hosting this event. I think it's a really valuable opportunity for us to be able to tell all of you about the work that we've done on Aadhaar and actually go into some of the substance of our work. So thank you for that opportunity. I also wanted to thank the ID Insight team that has worked on this report. So I'm going to actually call out your names. If you can just quickly raise your hands. So Elizabeth, who's a co-author on this report, is leading our initiative. Next to her is Buddy, who's also the CEO of ID Insight, who's also a co-author with me, and Nupur is also a co-author. And over on that side, Rajesh and Akash have provided excellent research support for this. So thank you, guys. One anecdote I wanted to share was that these guys have gone into the deep recesses of Indian government websites to actually fish out the data that we've used for this report. There's actually one instance where there was an Excel table that was converted into, that was printed, and then someone took a photograph of it, and then pasted the photograph onto a Word document, and then PDF'd that Word document and uploaded it. And this was kind of an example of the kind of data that we had to sort of fish through to finally be able to try and deliver some of the insights that we have over here today, that we hope to today. And finally, Heather Lanthorn, who's our technical advisor. She's in charge of ensuring that everything that we say is accurate, and we're not overreaching with the data that we have. So thanks a lot for the ID Insight team, and also a big thank you to Omidyar. They've, of course, financially supported us, but also provided a lot of intellectual engagement. Madhukar is not here today, but he and his team, it's been a pleasure to work with them. Okay. With that, I wanted to start off by just framing why we are talking about Aadhaar. The first question is, why does Aadhaar have the ability for a pivot, for transformation in the economy? We know that Aadhaar has reached over 1 billion people. We know that's about 1/7 of humanity today. We know that Aadhaar has a unique capability, its biometrics capability. And what that enables UIDAI to do is ensure that the database that it has of over 1 billion people is is such where each person is uniquely identified. And in a country like India, where when we create databases around programs, there are two major issues. One is ensuring that the database is complete, and the other is ensuring that the database is without duplicates and is clean. And for UIDAI to be able to do that with Aadhaar, the biometrics capability played a key role. And finally, we also know that a lot of public sector organizations and a lot of private sector organizations, and few private sector organizations have started using Aadhaar across India. We know that there's, and the reason for this use, the reason that they have sort of adopted Aadhaar, in some cases is per force, they've had to. In many cases, it's because they have believed that Aadhaar provides that identification tool that they need for their programming, and it does so in an interoperable manner. So it's not just for one program, but various organizations can use it. All of this point to the potential transformational impact that Aadhaar can have. However, we are all just as aware about the other side of the story. And each of the things that lead to why we think Aadhaar has a transformational impact also raise questions on whether, also raise important questions. So while it is true that Aadhaar has crossed 1 billion people, ever since the first enrollment to today, that process of enrolling people has been fraught with debate, and that debate has happened in our courts, has happened in our parliament, has happened in our media. And there's a big question. In fact, in 2011, the Standing Committee mentioned that while the Standing Committee in the Parliament that was reviewing the then Aadhaar bill mentioned that while we are actually debating UIDAI, it is unethical for UIDAI to go ahead and actually issue Aadhaar enrollment numbers. So this kind of growth that we've seen in Aadhaar has not been without debate. Similarly, while the biometrics, as I said, has enabled UIDAI to ensure uniqueness, it has also led to data security concerns, and there have been questions around privacy and the potential for this starting a surveillance state in India. And similarly, while a lot of organizations have used Aadhaar or is using Aadhaar, there are many open questions about the actual impact of that use and whether Aadhaar is the appropriate tool given the objectives that these organizations are trying to achieve. So we clearly understand there is this potential for transformational impact, and there are these really important open questions. However, both sides of the debate are not actually engaging in this using evidence. A lot of the people who are right now talking about this are talking past each other and do not have an empirical underpinning to present their case. And this is why ID Insight is really motivated and interested and is working on Aadhaar. What we're hoping to do is catalyze an evidence-based discourse on Aadhaar. As an organization, we are the main mission for ID Insight as an organization is to promote an evidence-based approach in policymaking and decision-making in the social sector. We work on agriculture, sanitation, nutrition, and many other sectors, and of course on Aadhaar. And we also work across states in India and in other countries in sub-Saharan Africa and also in the Philippines. So we have a wide range of programs that we do, research programs that we do. The reason Aadhaar is of so much interest to us, it's actually a really crucial ecosystem in India, but one where evidence has not played the sort of role it should. And because of that, the initiative that we've launched at ID Insight with the support of Omidyar Network is what we call the State of Aadhaar. And the aim of the State of Aadhaar initiative is to catalyze an evidence-informed discourse and decision-making in the Aadhaar ecosystem. The two main outputs that we have produced so far are the ones that you see on the screen right now. So one of them is the State of Aadhaar report, and the other one is our website, www.stateofaadhaar.in. The report, which we'll be talking about, which I'm going to be talking about next, is essentially providing a landscape review of all aspects of Aadhaar. It's getting into the technical and operational details of enrollment and authentication and other processes. It's getting into the legal evolution of Aadhaar and discussing its uses in sectors such as social protection and financial inclusion, and also emerging uses in other sectors such as education and telecommunication. We hope that this report provides that foundation for that evidence-informed debate that Yamini was referring to and that I was talking about in terms of what we hope will catalyze that in the future. And the second main output that we've produced is a State of Aadhaar website, which I'll also be discussing at the end of this presentation. I now wanted to get into some highlights of the report. As I said, the report covers a pretty wide landscape. However, to ensure that our discussion today is reasonably streamlined and can be done within 30 minutes, or at least I can speak within 30 minutes, I just wanted to highlight 4 important takeaways from our work that I wanted to share with all of you. So the first is that Aadhaar's use cases have been growing and have a lot of breadth, but they lack depth. So their penetration, there are various use cases around the country, but within each use case, its penetration has not been as deep. The second is that Aadhaar's impact on socio-economic and governance outcomes is unclear. And this is extremely important because there's a lot of messaging around its impact. But however, when we go through the actual data, the actual contribution of Aadhaar in improving lives, in reducing corruption, in improving service delivery is unclear. The third takeaway that I wanted to share today is that Aadhaar does have unintended impacts that have been reported quite frequently. There are issues around exclusion. There are issues around operational and technical difficulties on the ground. And those are causing difficulties for people who are trying to access benefits or accessing other services. However, the extent to this, the actual empirical extent of this issue and the contribution of various factors related to Aadhaar and not related to Aadhaar are not as well understood. And that's something that this report is trying to unpack. And finally, wanted to end with a little bit of discussion on data protection. Essentially, we all understand that data protection is key if the government of India has access to such a wide, large data biometrics. However, there is a sort of a concern that data protection is not front of center. What we see is that actually there are lots of interesting and useful data protection measures that the UIDAI has employed. What is actually missing are independent assessments on the validity of these things to actually engender the public's trust on whether these are sufficient. Let me get into each one of these one by one using some of the data that we present in the report. So I'll just start off with Aadhaar's use cases growing and having a lot of breadth, but not having, but there being a lack of depth. What do I mean by this? So to take an example, electronic Know Your Customer or eKYC is an Aadhaar-enabled service that enables you to open a bank account with just your Aadhaar number and your biometrics. Now, we see that almost all public sector banks and a majority of private sector banks have actually adopted eKYC. They have agreed, they have an arrangement with RBI and with UIDAI to actually open bank accounts using eKYC. However, the penetration of this feature across rural branches in India and across sort of all branches across India is actually quite low. And this is what I mean by the fact that there is quite a bit of breadth. A lot of organizations are taking it up. But within those organizations, the penetration of Aadhaar has actually not been that high. Let me show you a few examples. Let me first demonstrate the point around breadth. Our team enumerated all the use cases we could find on Aadhaar. And what we saw was that there are nearly 600 unique use cases of Aadhaar across India. So what is a use case? What we are defining as a use case is essentially an individual organization that has an agent that has the ability to decide whether or not to adopt Aadhaar. It's a combination of an individual organization that has the agency to decide whether or not to adopt Aadhaar and them using a particular use type of Aadhaar. So for example, if you're using Aadhaar, if you're a PDS organization in a particular state, your Food and Civil Supplies Department in a particular state, and you're using Aadhaar for both seeding and for authentication, that will be considered as 2 use cases according to this database. If you're a bank and you're only, if you're the State Bank of India and you're using Aadhaar for eKYC, but nothing else, that will be considered one use case according to this. With this definition, what we've seen is that there are nearly 600 use cases in Aadhaar, using Aadhaar, and these are spread across 6 use types. So I just wanted to show a graph to sort of show how this is laid out. Each of the bars here represent one particular use type. And what we mean by use type is a type of use of Aadhaar. And use cases will be individual organizations using it within a use type. So let me just ensure that I explain what each of these use types are, while many of you in the room will know what it is, to just ensure that everyone is on board. So the first use type mentioned here is seeding. This refers to linking Aadhaar numbers to the names of beneficiaries in government databases for programs such as PDS or Manrega. Authentication refers to using the biometric capability of Aadhaar for individuals to authenticate that authenticate themselves and identify themselves to the state or to whoever is asking for that authentication. Electronic Know Your Customer or eKYC refers to using Aadhaar to provide your demographic information to another entity. So, and this is basically your name, your address, and other details, by essentially just with your number and with your biometrics. And DBT refers to using Aadhaar for sending direct benefit transfers from the government to the state. And I'm going to get into this, each of these again. UPI refers to using Aadhaar for mobile payments. And finally, micro ATMs refers to using Aadhaar for powering micro ATMs, which are essentially mobile ATMs that banking correspondents or business correspondents use to provide banking services in remote parts of India. Okay, with that explanation, I guess what is evidently clear here is that seeding and authentication are the largest use cases, and followed closely by eKYC and DBT. When we say that, and you see that there are about, there's a differential use there are used, for each use type, there are certain types of sectors that dominate. So you'll see that, in seeding and authentication, social protection is the predominant use, and for DBT also, but for eKYC, it's mainly used in the financial inclusion space. Okay, this demonstrates clearly that Aadhaar does have a lot of breadth. We have always seen in the newspapers a new use of Aadhaar coming up every day, and it's definitely borne out in the numbers. We're also seeing that Aadhaar is growing quite a bit. Its use is growing quite a bit. So one clear demonstration of this is the use of Aadhaar in payment systems. In this graph, we're trying to show the trends in using Aadhaar for payments in 3 Aadhaar-enabled systems. And this graph shows the value of transactions using these systems. What you're seeing is that from November onwards, there's a huge growth in, basically after demonetization, there's a pretty significant growth where Aadhaar systems are being used for financial transactions. By March 2018, about 5,000 crores of direct benefit transfers was sent via the Aadhaar payment bridge system, and about 2,000 crores was transacted using UPI, basically mobile transactions using UPI. However, this is only a minority of the universe of digital payments. So if you consider the universe of digital payments, that's essentially all electronic transactions that all of us engage in. This includes credit cards and debit cards usage, online bank transfers, and also I think those, and ATM transactions. And the numbers are quite interesting. One, what we see is that less than 7% of the total digital transactions volume are done using Aadhaar. So the less than 7% of the number of transactions use Aadhaar in India. The number of digital transactions in Aadhaar in India use Aadhaar. We also see that only and this is probably a more striking number, only 0.06% of the total value of digital transactions use Aadhaar. So this is a pretty clear example where you see that financial payments using Aadhaar is going up, but they are still a minority of total electronic digital payments in the country. We also see this in DBTs. Usually, direct benefit transfers is considered intertwined with Aadhaar. People think of Aadhaar and direct benefit transfers as sort of one and the same thing. You know, you need Aadhaar to do DBTs. But actually, and last year about 22,000 crore rupees worth of DBTs was actually sent using Aadhaar. However, what the data shows, or for further analysis shows, is that only about 1/3 of the total DBT expenditure actually uses Aadhaar. A bulk of the DBT expenditure that we see in India, about 67%, is going through NEFT or through other electronic payment systems. So this is another example where lots of organizations are actually using Aadhaar for DBTs, but the proportion by which that they're using it is low. So many organizations are dabbling with Aadhaar, one can say, but its penetration has not been that high. Okay, there is one exception to this, and that is seeding. So as I had said, seeding is one of the most prevalent use cases of Aadhaar that we see. This is a heat map of seeding in Manrega, and we see that a predominantly most states in India have saturated seeding for their states, and that's the blue, whereas certain states are still getting there. And we also see that other programs such as LPG and PDS have about 82 and 72% seeding ratio. So seeding is one clear area where this is an exception, where we see this exception to this trend of lack of penetration of Aadhaar. Okay, I want to now move on to.
Clear? I mean, your previous slide said that NRAGS wasn't using Aadhaar too much, about 25%, but you're saying that NRAGS is heavily seeded with Aadhaar.
That's right.
So, could you just clarify that distinction?
Maybe you can just explain what seeding means. I think there's a little bit of confusion about that.
Sure. So there are two pieces to this. So seeding refers to essentially linking your Aadhaar number to your name in a beneficiary database.
Sorry.
However, that doesn't automatically translate into payments. So payments is a separate process where the government actually is using your Aadhaar and your Aadhaar linked bank account to provide you a direct payment. So
just making a payment into my Aadhaar linked bank account is not sufficient for you to qualify to be an Aadhaar payment.
So the way to think about it is that it is necessary to be seeded for you to make an Aadhaar payment.
But it's not sufficient.
Yeah, but it is not sufficient to be seeded.
Sufficient condition.
There are two main conditions. One is that your Aadhaar number needs to be linked to your beneficiary name in the database, and your number should also be linked to a bank account, and then that the organization that is sending you the money knows is going to basically send your money through NPCI, the National Payments Corporation of India, using Aadhaar to basically is going to be using your Aadhaar linked bank account needs to be mapped to the database that the National Payments Corporation of India is maintaining. So there are kind of like 2 or 3 processes of linkages that happens before Aadhaar can be used for payments.
So is it that the schemes have been more efficient at building an Aadhaar database for them into their MIS system? So Narega has collected all the Aadhaar numbers of most people, most beneficiaries whose names feature in the management information system. However, that database isn't necessarily linked to the payments database, which is a separate structure, architecture altogether, and that's why just because you're seeded doesn't necessarily mean that it's being utilized for payments. Yeah. Although in Narega, I thought the payment was linked to the MIS system.
But there's still a further linking that needs to happen between NPCI
and the bank.
And seeding has a benefit of its own, right? So seeding it's not that seeding is only done for payments. Seeding is also done to ensure that duplicates in the system can be eliminated. So sort of seeding is a standalone feature of. So payments is kind of, you would think of seeding as one use type and payments as a second use type.
So the seeding matters a lot in PDS. It will matter less in Aadhaar. I mean, in Narega, for example, right?
Yeah, it would matter less, yeah.
In principle, what you say is, even every Narega payment now, and not every year,
One second.
for the deduplication is the use for seeding as a function.
Yeah, so that would imply authentication, right? Seeding followed by authentication before. So rather than considering authentication as a separate use case, like after you add the number, you then authenticate to verify whether it's the same person, which is how you detect.
There are, actually those are two separate processes.
Okay.
So seeding is only linking the name in the database to your Aadhaar number. And that is not, when that is happening, they are essentially just collecting your Aadhaar number. आपका Aadhaar number क्या है और वो दिखाओ, उसके हिसाब से वो होता है. लेकिन that they don't actually deduplicate before they do the seeding. Because the seeding is like this mass process where they are telling block officers and district officers that, okay, you have these many people on your database, please collect everyone's Aadhaar number and put it in there, and then it gets digitized and updated, and that's where these ratios come from. But
Use in itself.
It is
Subsequently,
a use.
when you use.
It is a
It
use
is
because
your Aadhaar number is generated separately, right? So the minute, so the use is that a scheme is saying you going to use I need to link scheme related data to the Aadhaar number, and technically it will create the ability to use the Aadhaar number to see specific scheme related data in the scheme specific
There
database.
is also a simpler thing, which is an Aadhaar number is a unique number. So at least you know that every person to whom you are making an acknowledgement statement, presuming that database is going, is going to a unique number. Whether that number then belongs to X, Y, Z is a separate forensic process which can be used. Is that am I right in understanding from what you said, that if this linkage is done proceeding NIC, in principle, if you then want to do a post-facto check, then NREGS to accept that you have seeded this stuff, but be able to tell you the Aadhaar number of the person to whom the payment was made, even if the payment was not made this from PCI or not. Is that an accurate statement?
yes, but it would require more enhanced digital capability than just the seeding piece to be able to make that statement. But
Sorry,
yes.
Can I request that we move
Yeah.
beyond being seated?
Okay. Just wanted to sort of mention the main point, that the main sort of takeaway that we were trying to make here, which is that Aadhaar has a lot of spread across India. However, in many cases, and except for seeding, its penetration across the various organizations that are using it is still pretty low. The second main takeaway that I wanted to discuss today is that Aadhaar's impact on socio-economic and governance outcomes is quite unclear. This is quite crucial, and the reason for this is that the UPA government introduced Aadhaar and the NDA government is propagating Aadhaar essentially because it is expected to deliver on improving lives. It's expected to reduce, it's expected to increase access to benefits, reduce corruption, improve service delivery, reduce time for accessing service delivery. It is and improve the interoperability of different organizations to be able to provide these services across the country. Whereas, and the government has made assertions on this or has messaged that these socioeconomic impacts are being realized. However, the numbers do not fully bear this out, and that's what I wanted to demonstrate today. So one example is of the JAM Trinity. So we've always heard of this, I think from the previous economic survey. So JAM refers to, for those of you who you may not know, Jan Dhan, Aadhaar and Mobile. Jan Dhan is the flagship program of the Government of India to improve access to financial inclusion by enabling opening of bank accounts. And Aadhaar and mobile refers to the ability to use Aadhaar and mobile phones together to both open bank accounts and also to transact once you have a bank account. This, trinity, so to say, essentially implies to a lot of people that Jan Dhan and Aadhaar are interlinked, and again implies that the success that, or the ostensible success that Jan Dhan has had is linked to, is a sign of the contribution of Aadhaar. But let's just look at some of the numbers on that. So what we've seen is that by March 2018, the number of bank accounts that were opened under PMJDY or the Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana is 282 million. During the same time period, the number of bank accounts that have been opened using Aadhaar eKYC is only 44.7 million, or less than 16% of the number of PMJDY accounts. This shows the contribution of Aadhaar to PMJDY, and it shows that it's actually less than 16%. I do want to highlight that
44.7 million PMJDY.
I was just going to say that. So this is essentially accounts opened using Aadhaar eKYC, but not all these accounts are PMJDY accounts. So this is actually a ceiling number. If you think about it, the number of these accounts that were used for PMJDY is going to be lower. We don't know how much lower because that data is not available. So we know already that the contribution of Aadhaar to Jan Dhan is at most 16% and is likely to be far lower. And mind you, I'm not talking about the causal impact of Aadhaar on enabling financial inclusion. To understand that, we would need to know what proportion of these 44.7 million people who have opened an account using Aadhaar eKYC did not have an account before that and could not have opened an account using some other documentation. So this is not actually even getting to the sort of more rigorous causal estimate of the role of Aadhaar. It is just us basically saying the contribution of Aadhaar towards a flagship program such as Jan Dhan.
Just to
Another.
is it also true, just like you mentioned in the previous one, the bank account is, when you say eKYC, when you say bank account is opened and the guy gives his Aadhaar number, is it automatically part of the eKYC, or that is, because he might be using other KYCs or whatever to open the bank account, but he also has the Aadhaar number.
Yeah.
Can that be a case where the bank account is, the banker is collecting the Aadhaar number, but not using
As
Aadhaar
a KYC.
For sure. So you can provide your Aadhaar card as an identification documentation, but that will not be counted as eKYC. eKYC refers very specifically to using the number and the thumbprint to open your bank account sort of automatically using that platform. Another example is the role of Aadhaar in removing duplicates. So we were just discussing about seeding being a use case in of itself. The main aim of the seeding use case is to remove duplicates from beneficiary databases. I just wanted to present to you some numbers that are often quoted. So we see that the Prime Minister in Parliament, others in government have mentioned that thousands of crores of rupees have been saved across social protection programs by removing duplicates from the system. For example, here you'll see that about 14,000 crores was saved from PDS, according to the government, by removing about 23.3 million duplicates. However, there is actually no data that is available on what proportion of this 23.3 million that has been removed is due to Aadhaar, or there's a contribution of Aadhaar. Usually, sort of the communication is that the removal of duplicates is using Aadhaar, is using digitization, is using field checks, and is using just sort of kind of the due diligence process that the government is pushing. So again, it's quite unclear what is the role of Aadhaar. However, there have been claims where sort of the large savings the full savings number is mentioned. The total number right now is around 56,000 crores, and said an Aadhaar has contributed to this. But actually, the actual contribution of Aadhaar is not known. We have one data point which is an inadequate data point from 2014, but I'll show it to you because it's the only one we have. So in 2014, about the Food and Civil Supplies Department said that 12 million duplicates were removed from PDS. At the same time frame, UIDAI reported that about 2 million duplicates were removed using Aadhaar. Now, these were not the same report. They are from two different reports, so they are not strictly comparable. But this gives an indicative sense of the fact that the role of Aadhaar in removing duplicates may not be as high as might be sort of assumed when you just sort of hand wave over some of the details. The third point that I wanted to mention is that the unintended impacts of Aadhaar are not well understood. And so we have heard and we've read multiple reports of exclusion, multiple reports of operational difficulties. What I'm going to show is some government data that also motivates this question on what are the unintended impacts of Aadhaar, and then actually describe why I'm saying that I don't think these are well understood. So I wanted to talk about authentication failures. So what does authentication failure refer to? So this is essentially an individual trying to authenticate himself or herself to the state using their biometrics and their number electronically. So you will put your thumbprint or one of your fingerprints on the device, and you will enter your Aadhaar number. This will be sent to the UIDAI server, and the server will give a yes or no answer depending on whether the number and the biometrics that you have provided match the number and the biometrics in their system. If it does match, then it returns a yes, which means that you have been able to biometrically identify yourselves. If it's a no, then that is considered a biometric mismatch. What we're seeing in Andhra Pradesh and Telangana, about 1 in 7 people faced authentication failures despite repeated attempts. So despite trying 3 or 4 times, different fingers, or using their iris, they face this failure. Here is a graph that shows this over time. So this is from April 2015 to about March 2017. The lines here represent fingerprint and iris authentication for Manrega and for pensions in AP and Telangana. There are 2 things stick out. Of course, one is that the failure rate is pretty high. As I said, on average, it's about 1 in 7. The other is that there is no secular downward trend. We have heard that when you introduce something, there are teething issues, and over time, the operational issues should be going down. But actually, the government's own data does not bear this out, and we see that sort of the authentication failure numbers kind of jump around quite a bit, but there's no trend here.
What's the citizens' remedy if authentication fails?
I'm glad you asked. So an important point here, and that's why I've mentioned in brackets here, that this does not mean exclusion. So typically, in Andhra Pradesh and Telangana, if a citizen faces an authentication failure, the PDS shopkeeper or the Manrega official or the pensions official has the ability to disregard that authentication failure using an override facility and ask for any other identification to provide that particular benefit. So you're not actually right now allowed to deny benefits because of this failure, which of course raises questions on, why put the system in place in the first place. This is...
That depends on the discretion of the fair price shop owner. If he wants to do it, if he doesn't want to, he won't.
Yeah, there is an element of discretion that is obviously not legal, but they can definitely do it. I think...
But do we have a sense of, is this authentication failure, what percentage of this authentication failure is due to duplication, and what percentage of this authentication failure is due to difficulties in reading? So it's a machine problem versus a duplication problem.
What we know is that about 86% of all failures is happening because of biometric mismatches. Biometric mismatches can happen because the machine is dusty, can happen because the biometrics of an individual has waned over time because of, let's say, manual labor or a cut or something like that. But we do not know sort of distinction between between what is a machine problem and what is a fingerprint problem and what is a database problem.
I think the word for
Right, so we do want some degree of authentication failure if we assume that there is some
Duplication
cheating
is a
happening.
problem. Yeah.
And
yeah.
that's what we can disentangle.
And that's
what's
where the
manual versus
exclusion
digital.
story starts becoming important, right?
Right.
So are you denying ration because you're saying that you're coming back and you're telling me 3 times that you're wrong, but I know from your biometric that you're not wrong, and therefore I'm not going to give it to you? Or are you denying Ron because Ron is coming 3 times and for whatever reason his fingerprints aren't working? That's a problem I want to solve. If it's the former, then obviously my system is working.
Exactly.
I think it would be easier to ask questions. One is a protocol. Is there a standard protocol? Because when this thing first started a long time ago, when chemistry was informed, the idea was, if let's say there was one finger mismatch, they were not, it took quite a number of steps were supposed to be taken before the backend said this is not X. Because it says this finger didn't work, try another finger, try 2 fingers, whatever the story is. And go on until you have generally satisfied yourself that this is not good. So is that protocol standardized across different applications? When does one say there is a failure? Secondly, the issue is, the question you raised might make sense in a generalized anonymous story of authentication. But if you're looking at a PDA shop, where essentially the customer is somebody who's been going there on a regular basis, then that story is going to be less and less likely. Because unless there is severe pollution and structure, etc., that's going to be much less likely. If there is pollution, then you would see this downward trend because this action shop owner would figure out that there is no way of dealing with the system. So I'm not quite sure that works. Objection is there in theory, but for this particular case, we're looking at pensions and we're looking at rations and we're looking at
This is actually Manrega and pensions, not rations.
Manrega and pensions. There, because there's a muster roll, there's structures and a lot of other things in place, these kinds of failures are likely to be more where it's what they call a false rejection, where the person is most probably genuine, but for whatever reason it's not working.
So, but isn't there another problem? I mean, if there is a possibility of discretionary manual override, you go on full circle. How do you prevent leakages then? Because the person who's
You
following
know
the
exactly for how many of them are doing discussion.
Yeah.
That's
I mean, in fact, anecdotally, this is true. Mr. Vijay Madan, who's the former CEO, said exactly, he was telling us that, once the shopkeepers sort of figure out this, because of this, that this manual override exists, they have actually seen instances of a particular shop sending around, 50 requests or 100 requests at midnight to the UIDI system. Each time it's a failure. And then they use the manual override portion. And then what they've done is that, they've just not come to access their PDS over that month. At the end of the month, at night, I use your Aadhaar number and I use my fingerprints and it says it's rejected. Then I say that I have used my authority for manual override and I've given you the food grain. But in reality, I've been able to corner it. But here's the main thing. This is it. All of this is unfortunately in the domain of conjecture and theory currently, and that is actually the issue. And sort of, I've laid out here 4 main questions that I think we need to understand to truly understand the contribution of each of these operational issues in what is happening on the ground. What are the unintended negative impacts that might be happening on the ground? So we first want to know empirically what is the extent of actual exclusion that is happening. So both basically beneficiaries who should be getting it, but what also to understand those who should not be getting it or shopkeepers being able to corner it. We also want to understand what proportion of biometric mismatches is actually genuine fraud, as you were saying. We also want to understand how do authentication failures actually affect people. So let's assume that even if you do not face exclusion, are authentication failures leading to long lines and loss of working days? Are they leading to stress? Are they leading to coercion or bribes in other ways? So it's important for us to figure out it's important basically to understand what is the role of authentication failure in affecting individuals. And of course, finally, can authentication failures be reliably reduced? Over 2 years, we've not seen that, but can they be reliably reduced? Otherwise, would it make sense to continue with this, especially if the corruption reduction benefits are not easily availed? Okay, I wanted to end with sort of the fourth takeaway that I wanted to present, which is that data protection measures exist, but independent assessments are missing. A few of the data protection measures, important data protection measures that UIDAI has instituted and the law has, and the Aadhaar Act has also instituted are listed here. This is not the full list. A few things that are interesting to note. One is that all biometric images are stored offline. So this would therefore mean that you cannot access them, sort of hackers can't even get there. They're kind of firewalled to that extent. Data transfers between all agencies are supposed to be encrypted always. Vendors typically only have access to anonymized data. So some of you may know that vendors are used to deduplicate during the enrollment process. So basically, if I am the the billionth person who's got Aadhaar, they are checking my biometrics with the 999 million people who got it before me to ensure that it's unique. And that process is done by vendors. But these vendors only get access to the biometrics data and not the demographic data, so they are not able to store it with themselves. And they also do not get access to the image data. They only get template data, which is a coded version of it. One can go to the UIDAI website and lock one's own biometrics. And this ensures that no one can use your number or your biometrics. These are all safeguards that are put in place. And we know that by the law also that Aadhaar, one cannot publish Aadhaar numbers publicly. But there have been breaches to some of this. So for example, in Jharkhand, millions of Aadhaar numbers and bank accounts were put online. And there's a visceral reaction that we all have when this happens. Right now, because of the lack of penetration of Aadhaar, there isn't that much tangible harm one can do just if I have someone's Aadhaar number and their bank account number. I can't really harm them much. But one can see a future where if Aadhaar actually does attain this kind of deep penetration that it aims to, that it may potentially be, these data protection measures are extremely important to be effective to ensure that major data breaches don't happen and sort of subsequent crises don't happen based on that. Two things that we think the UIDAI can do in providing more evidence around this, so this is just a list of things that they assert that they do, is essentially there are currently no independent assessments on the quality and implementation of these safeguards. So there are internationally reputed technological organizations that can actually come in and say that A, these safeguards are the appropriate ones, and B, these safeguards are implemented well or not. This can help engender more trust in society around, which is essentially entrusting our biometrics to the government. And internal audits by UIDAI on data quality and data security are not in the public domain. we're not quite sure whether they are done, but if they are done, they are not in the public domain. So then therefore we also do not have a good understanding of sort of their internal data quality and data security maintenance measures. And again, this, if was in the public domain, can engender more trust amongst everyone. Before I end, I wanted to just quickly tell you a little bit about, I've just mentioned the 4 highlights. Before I end, I wanted to quickly tell you a little bit about the State of Aadhaar website. The website is meant to be providing resources for practitioners and researchers, such as many of us in this room, to work on Aadhaar and to actually get access to evidence related to Aadhaar. It's organized by focus areas, and it's also organized by resources. So the website offers data visualizations for better intuitive understanding of Aadhaar. There's a use case database that is categorized on each. So each of those 500, nearly 600 use cases, you can see the list there. There's a literature database that shows all the research that's available on Aadhaar to date. Again, categorized. There's a data library for to access those hard-to-reach data sets, those PDFs, but converted into Excel form or CSV form and put up there. And there's a document library of all official documents related, or hopefully all official documents. I'm sure we've missed out on some related to Aadhaar, also including the various notifications from governments about the use of Aadhaar. To just give you a glimpse, this is a glimpse of some of the data visualization. A lot of what you've seen in the slides here are available in an interactive format on the website. And this is a glimpse of the database. As you can see, you can search the use cases here by the focus area, so which sector it's in, or the use type, or also which state it's in. So this enables you, so if you really wanted to know if Aadhaar is being used in Delhi or in Bihar, there are just simple filters here for you to be able to see that. We encourage all of you to visit this website and use this website. And there's a suggested content section in the website. So if you think that anything is missing or anything is erroneously mentioned, we'd love to get your input. So thank you very much. I'm putting up here sort of those 4 important takeaways so that we have this on the screen. Thank you very much for your time. I just wanted to open it up to any questions you may have, and Yamini, if you wanted to start us off. Thank you.